I'm really pleased to be talking to you today, Rikki, on this day of Transgender Remembrance. Thank you for coming on and talking to the British Psychological Society. Can you tell me a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I've been I've been trans all my life. I started to become aware of this when I was around about 6 years old, and school noticed odd parts of my behavior. I didn't seem to get on with kids my own age. In fact, I didn't really get on with boys. I've always had this preference for being with girls, but I also saw the way in which anybody who deviated from that gender stereotype of being, what's expected of a boy, automatically became subjected to all kinds of bullying and harassment. So I kept it quiet, kept it a real secret. When I got married, I told my partner, and it was accepted, but let's not tell anyone about it. So right until I was 50, I've always found that I had to keep it a secret. And then at the age of 50, somebody threatened to blackmail me, and I just said, no, I'm going to come out. So I came out, and everybody stopped doing business with me. So it was really tough, but I've never regretted it.
Does that mean that you came out at work, or you came out across the board in your life?
Well, I was self-employed by then as a speaker. I'd been working a lot in the technology field, particularly for one big company. They were about to stop the program that employed me, so I knew I was going to lose it anyway. But I did find that nobody wanted to hire me after that. And what I did actually was then decide, well, I'm going to go to university. I did a master's degree in gender research to become an expert and specialist in the field of gender, and particularly obviously with a focus on transgender. And since then I've been doing transgender awareness, because in the noughties, everybody, the Equality Act was being put together, and everybody wanted diverse people on their boards and on their committees. So it was the right time for me to come out. It gave me an opportunity to establish myself. It's been a bit tough the last 5 years, though. Things have been going a little bit the other direction.
Right. Well, I'm sorry to hear that. Because you are a gender specialist, can you tell us, do you think society still struggles with the term transgender? Do you think that people really understand what that means? When we're talking about Transgender Day of Remembrance, what does that actually mean?
There are about a few questions. So let me deal with Transgender Day of Remembrance. Most people tend to think of transgender as someone who is actually physically changing their body. But the fact is there are about 500,000 people who fall under that umbrella of transgender. Some of them are non-binary, some of them are secretly trans, some of them have transitioned and are living in stealth, nobody knows, particularly trans men. That's much easier. Once they've taken testosterone, it becomes, after a couple of years, they just look like any other man. So a lot of people are doing that. Now, Transgender Day of Remembrance started about 21 years ago as a result of the death of, I think somebody noticed that there was a huge level of people being killed, particularly in Brazil, and this year it's stretched up into Mexico. The number this year, it's around about 350. Mostly trans women have been brutally murdered because they were trans and for no other reason. And that's the sort of number we've been seeing every year. It wasn't so many at the beginning, but a lot of that was because of underreporting. We still don't know how many reported, but it's frightful. Not so bad in the UK. We get 1 or 2 a year. Again, that may be due to not reporting. America has had about 35 this year, people where we know it was a trans person and they were brutally killed. And I mean really brutally. Sometimes it's shot multiple times, beaten to death, burnt alive. I mean,
right, very distressing sorts of deaths. Yes, that's very, very distressing. One of the things as well we might like to comment on is transgender people, Black transgender people seem to suffer even more.
I think, if you think that, transgender people experience, 3 out of 4 transgender people experience unemployment. Or are unemployed, you can almost increase all the statistics, the bad statistics for deaths and everything else, by 25 to 50% if it's a person of color. So it's not just Black, it's also Hispanic people in Brazil, Mexico, a place like that. Very often, if it's here, it's Black trans people who are killed. And it's not just the trans person. For example, if Muslim trans people, if they're outed here, very often the families back in Syria, Iraq or Iran, they're the ones that are going to get targeted because the message is passed through networks back in to that country. And then you've got that whole issue of honor. So sometimes trans people of color are actually attacked by their own family because they have dishonored the family. And that's a much more difficult issue to try and deal with.
Absolutely. It sounds like that there's a different layers of challenges for trans people globally and also in the UK.
Absolutely. I mean, if you're different, you're still prone to get, so what most trans people try to do is to blend in. We don't want to be noticed, don't want to be out there, don't want to be making a noise, just blend in, get on with life. But it's very difficult. If testosterone has made you into a 6'4", built like a tank, but you feel like you should be 5'5" and Britney Spears, you're going to battle all your life with the fact that your physical body won't work, which is why people want to try and transition early, because then you can take hormone blockers, stop the effects of testosterone and the effects of estrogen, because there are a lot of trans men who just don't want to have bilateral mastectomies. They don't want periods all their life. They want to try and get as close to possible as living in the gender they feel they should have been. But we're getting lots of battle against that, because obviously there are parents who don't want their children to do it, and they're trying to stop it and block it. And so there is a bit of an ongoing battle at the moment. I think we're winning overall. Things are moving and getting progressively better, but every time we think it's going okay, suddenly it slides back, as we've seen the Gender Recognition Act we thought was going to get reformed to make it more easy. And Liz Truss has decided, no, Liz Truss, isn't it? Sorry. She's decided to just make a few minor adjustments. So now we've got another review on to try and look at it. And this is the problem. We have a review, we think things are going forward, then it goes back, then it goes forward.
Do you think there's still a case that people don't actually believe in the identity of transgender?
Yeah. Some people still think this is just a mental health problem. We've battled and argued this one for decades. Psychiatrists, psychologists have looked at it. There have been people done research looking at the brain. We know trans women, trans men have brains which are just, it's only tiny microscopic differences between brains, but it looks as if the brain in some way becomes masculinized or feminized during fetal development. There are other people who say, no, we've looked, we can't find it. So right. This is the difficulty, because brain research is so difficult. It's easy for either side to come out with arguments saying, no, it's not. And you've got political vested interests, because obviously women have been constantly put down on the basis that, oh, you're not as good as men because you've got different brains. And we know that's all rubbish. Women get far more degrees now and far more PhDs.
Would you say that it's true that a lot of trans people would have come into contact with psychologists and the psychological practices during the course of their life as a transgender person?
If a trans person wants to go onto the care path, whether it's privately or whether it's through the NHS, they have got to see a psychiatrist. That's the process right now. And you have to be assessed as having gender dysphoria. Once you've got that assessment, it's like your ticket, you automatically then, you can easily change your driving license, you can change your passport, you can get yourself onto at least the waiting list. But here's the big problem. You get onto the waiting list to go to the NHS. It's a 5-year waiting list now, because so many people are doing it. Even for young people, same long waiting list. And what's happened now, of course, is we just said, oh, it's elective surgery, scrap it, let's wait until after COVID.
Right.
So that's really hitting the mental health of so many trans people, is they just can't get access to help. And if they do, then you're going to expose yourself to the risk of COVID infection as well. If you do.
Yes, certainly COVID is adding a real challenge, I would imagine, for people on waiting lists. In terms of psychology and psychologists, what would you say the psychological world can actually do to support trans people more?
Right. Well, if you know that someone's trans, what now is happening, for example, is that we know that COVID has caused huge amounts more unemployment. We already know that trans people suffer from much higher levels of unemployment. It's much more difficult to get a job. It's more difficult to hold a job. So when something comes along which wipes out millions of jobs, it's going to disproportionately impact people who are in the transgender, non-binary community. So that's going to add to their stress, add to their mental health problems. So if you've got trans people, I think just try and understand, if you're dealing with trans clients, and most trans people will be trying to access some kind of talking therapies to try and get the help and support that they need. And it's going to be worse. This year has made it a lot worse, because at the moment we have no idea when this is going to end, no idea when things are going to get better. And I think there's a much higher risk now of self-harm, suicide, depression, and all of those kinds of mental health problems, which are so difficult to handle. But the most important thing to understand is being transgender is not a mental health problem. That decision was made. The Diagnostic and Statistical Manual has now removed it as a mental health illness. It's there as a condition, but it's not as an illness. So gender dysphoria is a real problem, but yeah, the mental health issues that come with it need talking therapies helps.
Well, that's really interesting. Thank you so much for talking to us today, Rikki, and I'm sure that we'll be seeing more of you in the future.
My pleasure.